There are three things in life that are certain: death, taxes, and the never-ending expansion of our intelligence agencies. Case in point, according to new documents, it turns out that the federal government is already in the process of building a new headquarters for the FBI, and this new complex will be at least twice the size of the Pentagon. You heard that right. According to the new plans, which have just been made public, federal officials right now are deciding between three different plots of land to build the new FBI headquarters on. Here are the options. You have a 58-acre property over in suburban Springfield, Virginia. You have a 61-acre property in suburban Greenbelt, Maryland. Or you have a giant 80-acre parcel of land over in Landover, which is also in Maryland. One of these lucky locations will be the home of the FBI's new 2.1 million square foot campus, meaning that at a minimum, the new FBI headquarters will be at least twice the size of the Pentagon. And for your reference, the Pentagon covers only about 29 acres, and it has been, up until now, the largest office building on Earth. And so really take that in for a moment. The largest office building on Earth, which houses the administrative center of our military, will soon be dwarfed by the new building that's being built for the federal police force. If you've ever wanted a visual representation of who the government thinks is the real threat in this world, well, perhaps this is it. Now, at the moment, and for the past 50 years, the FBI headquarters has been located in Washington, D.C., over in the J. Edgar Hoover building located at 935 Pennsylvania Avenue. That building, by the way, is already massive, covering about 2 square blocks. And just as a fun fact, according to a recent survey, the J. Edgar Hoover building, with its brutalist architectural design, was voted to be the ugliest building in the United States. In that same poll, they also found that it was the second ugliest building in the entire world, right behind the Scottish Parliament building. Regardless, though, the reason for the change of location is not necessarily because of aesthetics. The official reason is twofold. First of all, the FBI has grown too big, even for their current giant building. At the moment, the FBI has a total of about 35,000 employees. And while thousands of them do work out of the J. Edgar Hoover building, they've essentially reached the limit. And so at this moment, you have thousands of FBI agents work at about a dozen other locations that are leased by the government in and around Washington, D.C. And the best part is that the cost to you and me, the American taxpayers, for these leases is already about $150 million a year. And so that's the first issue, saving money. The second issue has to do with the fact that the J. Edgar Hoover building takes up 2 square blocks of precious Washington, D.C. real estate. And so by getting rid of it, the city plans to turn that particular site into housing units, office space, as well as retail locations, and probably to get rid of the eyesore that is the building itself. And so those are the two official reasons, anyway, for this proposed change of location. Now, if you think there's another reason that's remaining unsaid, something maybe behind the scenes, well, I'd love to know your thoughts. Leave them in the comments section below. And of course, as you're leaving your comment, please smash those like and subscribe buttons as well. That way this video can be shared out to ever more people. Now, because this is being done under the Biden administration, the agency that's in charge of selecting the location, as well as building the complex, has to take into account diversity, equity, and inclusion due to several executive orders that were issued shortly after Joe Biden took office. And so along that line, the General Services Administration, otherwise known as the GVA, they are the agency that administers federal properties, and they put out a plan, you can see it up on screen for yourself, which includes the 5 criteria that they'll be using to choose the new property. Those 5 criteria are the FBI's general requirements for accomplishing their mission, easy access for FBI personnel via transportation lines, practical time considerations in terms of construction, promoting climate change sustainable development and advancing equity, and then lastly, cost. And so notice, the cost to you and me, the American taxpayer, is the absolute last consideration, coming after the promotion of the green agenda and diversity. $31 trillion in debt, and our priorities are what they are. However, there's one other aspect to this that I believe is worth mentioning, which has to do with what people generally refer to as the slippery slope. And in order to explain what I mean by that, let's rewind the clock by 120 years. You see, in 1901, President William McKinley was assassinated by an anarchist who was heavily influenced by Karl Marx. And after McKinley's death, his vice president, Teddy Roosevelt, became president. Within a few years, Teddy Roosevelt then assigned Mr. Charles Bonaparte to be his attorney general. And as a fun fact, Charles Bonaparte was actually the great-nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, at that time, there wasn't really anything in the way of federal law enforcement here in the U.S. You only had a few agencies, like for instance the Secret Service, who could tackle some national crime and security threats, but that was it. And so Mr. Charles Bonaparte, frustrated with the situation, began seeking more executive power. For instance, here was a complaint that he lodged to Congress back in 1907. Quote, "The Department of Justice has no executive force, and more particularly, no permanent detective force under its immediate control. A Department of Justice with no force of permanent police in any form under its control is assuredly not fully equipped for its work." And so, using the threat of violent anarchism as well as the death of William McKinley as the pretext, he began pushing Congress to establish a federal police force. However, back then, Congress was reluctant to fund something like an FBI because they were worried that it would eventually become too powerful. They feared that it would eventually become something like a secret police force that would spy on Americans or even on members of Congress. And in fact, to that end, on May 27th of 1908, Congress voted to prevent the Department of Justice from hiring Secret Service agents as investigators. Essentially, they were denying the Justice Department the ability to either establish a national police force or to even hire Secret Service agents to do their bidding. But this is where the conspiracy came in, because President Teddy Roosevelt was actually on the side of his Attorney General. And so what these two men did was that they waited until Congress went into recess. And once it did, Attorney General Charles Bonaparte, he reorganized the Department of Justice, and he created, under his own control, what he called a Corps of Special Agents. Then, shortly afterwards, on July 26 of 1908, Charles Bonaparte officially ordered all Justice Department attorneys to refer most of their investigative matters to the chief examiner, who would then determine if there were special agents under his command available to investigate the case. Essentially, the Attorney General created an FBI in practice despite what Congress wished for. Then, during the State of the Union address in December of 1908, Teddy Roosevelt attacked Congress. He scolded them in front of the nation and said that the only reason that they opposed the plan was because, quote, "the congressmen did not themselves wish to be investigated." And wouldn't you believe it? After just a little back and forth, Congress caved in, they folded like a lawn chair, and they agreed to fund what later became known as the FBI. And since then, since the year 1908, the FBI has grown 1,000-fold, going from only 34 employees at the start to over 35,000 today. And of course, they are now expanding into a building that's at least twice the size of the Pentagon. However, let me ask you a question. With the recent revelations that have come out about what the FBI is actually doing behind the scenes, whether it's censoring free speech on Twitter, entrapping people in plots to kidnap governors, using stingray devices to secretly spy on Americans, secretly investigating presidential candidates, and so on and so forth, do you think that Congress was right to worry about the FBI becoming too powerful? Did their fears actually come to fruition? I'd love to know your thoughts. Please leave them in the comments section below. I'll be reading them later today as well into the week. All right, the sponsor of today's episode is a phenomenal company called AMAC. That's AMAC, and it stands for the Association of Mature American Citizens. They are quite literally one of the fastest growing conservative organizations in all of America, and you should consider joining for three main reasons. The first is the money saving benefit, because as a member of AMAC, you get access to a ton of discounts at many different verticals. Things like vitamin stores, restaurants, retail shops, and so on and so forth. If you want to check out the full list, it's pretty exhaustive, you can do so over on AMAC's website. The second benefit is that you get exclusive access to the AMAC magazine. It'll be delivered directly to your doorstep, and it contains phenomenal coverage as well as deep analysis. And then the third benefit, the one that people say is their favorite, is that AMAC fights for your values over on Capitol Hill. In fact, you can check out the online version of this on their website. It's the AMAC Action Advocacy Annual Report, and it shows exactly what they're doing on Capitol Hill in terms of fighting what they call the socialist storm that's brewing in this country. So head on over to amac.us/facts matter and sign up today. I'll also throw a link down in the description box below. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, most importantly, stay free.